All right, well, a pleasure to be here. It's a double header today. So, as I mentioned in my first webinar, this really can be anything that you all want it to be. In the last 2 years, we've done some pretty extensive studying about how adults learn, and that was eye-opening for us as extension educators. We tended to be a one-trick pony. We were more of the lecture and disseminate information via PowerPoints or via field days or twilight meetings. And we found that wasn't really the most effective way that farmers learn or that adults learn. Likewise, we've also really done a lot of work with evaluation both to determine needs and teaching methodology preferred by participants, and also evaluation to assess outcomes of programs. So we can take this wherever it goes, irrespective of the PowerPoint slides, and I'll take your lead from your questions. So wherever you want to go, and I can pull up PowerPoints at a heartbeat on adult education and things to that effect too, if that's what you want. But this is what I prepared based on what I was communicating with Tina. So Anu Rangarajan from Cornell and myself gave a webinar to our National Organic community, and it was using evaluation data to develop and improve extension programs. So Anu's to the left and I am to the right. Okay. What program development tools do all of you use or are you familiar with? I can't see if there are any comments. Nothing yet?
No.
So let me ask you,
Short term.
short term, okay. Are people familiar with the logic model at all?
Yes.
Okay. Bennett's hierarchy?
You could probably go into a bit of detail on it.
Okay. So the logic model is really based off of Bennett's hierarchy, but the whole idea let me actually take a step back. So there's a variety of extension programs, right? So if you want to have people understand, be able to identify grasses, here's fescue, here's, reed canary grass, you name it, Kentucky blue, so on and so forth, then, you're really looking at a kind of a hit and run. Here's some slides, here's some, ways of identifying it before they've headed out, after they've headed out, so on and so forth. What we're talking about with these outcome-based programs that you're actually raising the bar to say, we want a behavior change. We want you to do something differently as a result of our programming. And so likely you're going to need several different activities, programs, interventions, whatever you want to call that. And so that might be that you want people to actually not do set stock grazing or not do rotational grazing, but go into a more management intensive grazing format, or keep records and analyze those for cost of production and so on and so forth. So you're really looking at a skill that you're hoping to result in a different, in a long-term outcome. So to the right of this slide, you see this long-term approach. So you're looking for a changing condition. Socially, you might be looking at improved quality of life. You might be looking at better adjusted kids. You might be looking at higher profitability for farmers, more community economic development, so communities are more prosperous, storefronts are filled. You might be looking at policy changes on a civic thing. Environmental, you might be looking at reduction in soil erosion, improvement in water quality. These are the type of long-term outcomes that often happen 5 to 7 years after concentrated education. But the idea would be that you would be able to identify what it is you want to result from your programming, and that's where the program development kind of really starts. So then you take a step back from that and you say, okay, so what actions, what behavior changes need to occur in order for those conditions to be met. So farmers need to be keeping records. They need to understand their markets better. Um, uh, People need to have better skills leaving the prison system so recidivism is reduced. People need to parent with a different model aside from behavior punishment. So you're assessing, okay, these are the practices we actually want people to make. These are the policies, these are the social actions that people have to come together in groups and meet and support each other, so on and so forth. Communities have to put these infrastructures into place, childcare, whatever have you. So the idea is, again, you know what conditional outcomes you want long term. The medium term is really where, at least in New Hampshire and Wisconsin, where I served in extension and where I've been working across the country, these action outcomes are really where we set the bar. We want a program to last 3 years, maybe 4, and as a result of that program, people are now doing something differently. So then you take a step back from there and you say, okay, so what do I have to teach them? And these teaching outcomes really then get broken down into, okay, what knowledge do they need? What attitudes do they need to change? So do they need to change an attitude of, oh, I don't need to do any record keeping. I'm just going to produce a crop, sell it at the prevailing market rates, and we'll be profitable enough. Everyone else does it that way. I'm fine. Or, look, so attitudes might need to change. Skills might need to change. Food preservation skills. They need to be able to do pressure canning. They need to be able to know how to freeze things. They need to know how to do QuickBooks or electronic record keeping, that type of thing. Opinions, aspirations, motivations. So that's the whole idea when we look at a logic model or a Bennett's hierarchy or any program development tool. We sit down and we try and really think of what do we want to result from our programming. So that gets us into a very different mindset from an activities-based program. So an activities-based program might be, we are going to do 7 pasture walks. We are going to focus on, how to graze cows, then how to graze sheep, then how to do, mixed species grazing with chicken and horses and cows all together. And we're going to move these around the province to 7 different farms, and we're going to have them be different size farms, and we think that's going to teach farmers a lot about grazing. That would be an activities approach. And the outcome approach is we need to be able to have farmers, we want to have less bare ground, denser swards, that's going to then reduce erosion and improve water quality. So as a result, farmers are going to have to be able to really use management-intensive grazing. Skills they are going to need are going to be assessing available forage levels, determining recovery times or how long a paddock has to be rested. They're going to have to understand how much daily feed their livestock are going to need. They're going to have to change their attitudes about just releasing animals and wishing them luck and bringing them in at night. And now we're then going to design our learning activities to meet that. Does that make sense, and are there questions? Because that's really the backbone of what we're going to need today.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay. Any opinions on that? Any people doing that successfully? Is that how you approach your extension programming? Or if you're not extension, whatever nonprofit programming you're doing, agency programming?
I know for us, for our nonprofit, when we put our applications into the provincial government for our core funding, we very much have to be outcome based long term for the 3 to 5 years down the road. So we have to look at the behavioral changes that we would be addressing, and then within our programs and with our staffing, we look at the short-term activities.
Mm-hmm. So let's have a conversation about how do you then determine those outcomes and how do you then determine those activities. And as many people in on this conversation as can be, I'm going to expand out to see the text box because this slide you've seen for a little bit now. So I don't know if people want to unmute and speak or if they want to type in the text box, but how do you approach this then? Any educators out there?
One of the things we do just to get it started is we do surveys of our producers to look at what areas they're looking at information, um,
Mhm.
and then looking at some of the statistics as well in the area that are done with Stats Canada around um, uh, management practices and whatnot. So we use that as a basis of a starting point, and then of course having conversations with producers to see what their concerns are and having observations at events to what the comments are that people are making.
Okay, excellent. Others in there? Seeing nothing, I'll just going to go forward. But what appealed to me, what Carla was saying, is certainly asking your audience what they want is one mode, and it's a very good mode. But that begs the question, how do you know what you don't know? And so statistics, other practices also then become helpful there. Reading grants, uh, and so reading other projects done in the past, that also becomes a good tool. But the idea is, so you're going to have the end in mind. And so if you take nothing away from this, the end in mind is pretty key. Okay, so then we are going to next slide, technological difficulties. There we go. Okay, so taking the pulse. So needs assessments can be done in a couple different ways. Certainly, we're going to introduce that in assessing an outcome-based program, we are going to want to look at a before, a during, and an after. And so before is fairly common. Carla spoke about using surveys. They could be electronic surveys, and that's what we're going to talk about in a little bit. They could be these focus groups. They could be individual interviews. You're on farm visits, so I go on farm visits, and I get a flavor either from direct conversation or from what I see of needs for educational program. Rarely, in my experience, were people really measuring during a program about what they wanted changed in that program. And then afterwards, we'll often try and do a post-evaluation to see what difference it made. But we often don't follow up with them. What do we need to give for additional education? So we'll just examine these themes. And again, ask questions. A lot of this certainly also comes to play with adult education theory. So hopefully we'll bring some of that in. Okay, so this is an example of an online survey that Anu put together. It's very simple. It's looking to really guide the program. Its strengths, as you can read to the left, that they're cheap. So Qualtrics is free, and SurveyMonkey, I mean, I think I pay $150 a year for that. Data is collated for you, the click of a button, and it's fast, and it also can keep track of who hasn't completed the survey, and you can send out quick reminders. Weaknesses. So people get a lot of fatigue from email links being sent. Can you complete this survey? It'll only take you 10 minutes. We bag and whatnot for it. And likely you also can get some bias in there too. So depends on how you ask your questions. But this is an example of the survey that Anu created. And they were really looking to get input for urban farming program they're running in upper state New York. Okay, here was an example. You can see this question was, how did you learn about this survey? So you could see that a lot of this went to websites and people that were already web oriented, and that could be a problem if you're sending obviously out an electronic survey. You're likely not going to learn about it from these other sources. So her point was that there was a lot of bias in there. So Um, Here's some other aspects of online survey tools. Do folks use online survey tools on this webinar?
We do a little bit.
Okay. What program?
We've used SurveyMonkey.
SurveyMonkey? Okay. Anyone else familiar with using online surveys? Is this something that is of interest to you, or should we just skip ahead? If we don't use it often, is there a reason for it? Growers don't have access to it. It's not a preferred method. Hearing nothing, I'm kind of at a loss for direction, so allow me to just kind of whip through this a little bit. Um, Actually, allow me to skip this. It's somewhat self-explanatory, so I'm going to skip onto that. Okay. All right. So, yeah, this is a lot about online surveying. So if you're going to use an online survey, one of the things we really highly recommend is that you form a design team. Don't, and the idea being, don't just create a survey on your own and then send it out. There's going to be a lot of errors often, or it won't be as user-friendly as you want, or the questions will make sense to you in your head, but they won't necessarily make sense to others. And that's what even just you having two of your colleagues or friends just take the survey and give you feedback and said, I have no idea what you're asking in question 2. Question 3 took me way too long, so I just skipped it. Your drop-down menu offered choices, none of which applied to me. These are going to be feedback you're going to get from having a design team. We also have these human subject reviews where if we are going to survey people, certainly if they're going to be under the age of 18, we have to get approval from our university. That's something that you can all check into though. But language is going to be something as well, something meaningful to you and not to folks. But okay, so here's another example of an online survey that Anu put together. And so, okay, going to kind of skip through a lot of the. So examples of education methodology. This is going to be pretty important to do. This is something that I don't see many people asking about the methodology preferred. Do you folks assess that when putting together a program? No? So one of the things that you could Google if you wanted is work by Dr. Sandy Bell, B-E-L-L, and that's B as in boy. She's out of the University of Connecticut. She looked at how farmers best learn. And so she came up with 5 best practices. So one of those practices is really giving farmers choice of both content and education method. So when we do survey, we often give the selection of what content. Do you want to learn about this? Do you want to learn about that? Rarely will we ask about education method. And oftentimes it's not a choice we're going to give them. We're going to put together a lecture-based presentation on a subject that that they help select. Giving them choice will get them more engaged in the program. Likewise, you'll also be able to better reach them. So, and it's also going to guide your assumptions. Are they going to read before a program? Are they going to come to a program and want more hands-on activities? Would they prefer small group work? Would they prefer large group work? Would they prefer some on-farm research that they're not going to believe it unless they see it themselves and they see plot-to-plot comparisons, those type of things. So that holds true for farmers. It holds true for adults. So giving them a choice of education would also be something that is important. Education methodology. Again, we said when we're planning our program, here's a long-term outcome we ultimately like. Then we said, here are the behaviors that are going to have to uh, change, be implemented rather, um, in order for those outcomes to occur. And if we want those behaviors or those practices or those policies to be implemented, here's what we're going to have to learn. And so now we're kind of on, well, how do we learn? And so, and it's really going to change based on the participant group. So again, it's really something that is helpful to survey the farmers for and or survey your audience from, and it was one of the research results that Sandy Bell found. You can see some of the things here, reading or videos from a computer at your farm or home, or do you want to in-person workshops? And you know, 75% wanted at home, over half still wanted it at the, and you would check all that apply here, want in-person workshops, and so you kind of create a program that had a hybrid of those.
This is kind of
We
interesting,
um we
because
found that actually
sorry, I said this is kind of interesting because 5 years
no,
ago we wouldn't have asked if they wanted to learn it from videos in their home so much. Like having webinars and having these different tools, it's
mhm.
changing the game a little bit, right?
But it really does in an interesting manner, and so and you come to find out that it's actually the fusion of both of those. If you could bring people together to, so another one of Dr. Bell's findings for how adults learn is that they really need a safe environment to learn. So they want to feel safe. And so that has two factions to it, or two fractions to it. One being the environment's comfortable physically, not too hot, not too cold, the seats are comfortable, yada, yada, yada. Chairs are arranged in a manner that people are feeling comfortable physically and mentally. The other then is that emotional comfort, like they actually feel safe to share their opinion and they feel safe to dissent and so on and so forth. So you do it online. How do you create that? There are certain ways that you can create that um, comfort and safety. One way that we found really helpful for us is to bring all the participants together, in person, session one. Now they get to know each other. Then we can run a couple, 4 or 5 different modules online using technology, and then we can bring them together maybe 2 months later or whatever have you for another kind of summary session. Folks here watch any videos online, educational videos to learn?
I find that producers are. I mean, sometimes they're sitting on the edge of a field waiting for a silage truck or something. So the little 3-minute videos, we seem to get a lot of feedback on them that they like it. So
Yeah. And so that's pretty key that you also randomly said 3 minutes. So we found in our research that videos over 4 minutes in length, people tend to tune out after time. So what's happened after 4 minutes is then people are not following. They kind of tune out, and then but 4 minutes or less, they have greater retention. So that's something to pay attention to when you make little snippets. Even if you made one long video, 10 minutes long, and broke it up into three different modules. So that's something that we found, if that's of any help to you. But videos are a good way of the mind learning. Um, if you are going to use the different educational methods like webinars or technology, another good thing to do is actually to have people write or journal. Any ideas why that would be?
reflection helps with retention.
Yeah, reinforces the concept, yep, but assisting and remembering later on. Pretty key. The brain, 90 to 95% of all sensory input. So you're talking hearing, taste, smell, touch, um, sight, all those senses. 95% of that information is actually rejected by the short-term memory. Never makes it into the short-term memory. It can't. We just take too much information in through all those senses. So it has to be pretty exciting and pretty meaningful to make it into the short-term memory. And so one of the ways of getting it into the short-term memory is it's heard and then you process it. A mental image you might think to reinforce this concept is a blender. So you give your audience information, they need to process it, they need to put it into the blender, and then it gets into short-term memory. And then thereafterwards, it can then go on and move on into the long-term memory and stay for long time use and has to be practiced and repeated for that. But it's pretty key. So that's just one of those reasons. So what writing does, it is a very, very effective processing tool. So that's how it helps it stick. Anybody know what the longest you should be lecturing to an audience for at one point in time is? Guesses in minutes. 20. Double 20s. Yeah, really good guesses. 45. Okay. Other ideas? So if you're an academic and you are like a grad student or a professor, someone who's just used to really like being in a lecture format, 18 minutes is you're like a marathon runner. The average adult, 12 to 14 minutes. Under 18, you got 8 to 10 minutes. So this is just on average, right? So it's not gospel, but nonetheless. So you're looking at really 15 minutes, then the mind just becomes saturated and starts tuning off, which is the other thing writing does. So if we wanted to make this a very effective webinar, we would have had, what I'm trying to do is get conversation going back and forth and your ideas, but we would have you writing down various answers and processing it. And so you with your growers will want to have them do that as well if you want to have really effective education. So I know that I've been talking for about a half an hour now, looking at the activity level. People are likely tuning in and out. And so if I think of a cup and I'm pouring a pitcher of water or milk into that cup, I know that I've saturated that cup. I filled it up and it's now overflowing. So you're not going to get the optimal amount of information from here forward unless I do some activity that empties that cup. And that activity could be you all breaking into small groups and talking amongst yourselves on a problem. That activity could be that you have an individual task to do. It could be that you journal and stop and write on journal and write on this topic. Now, if you're in a lecture hall or this type of webinar, the activity also could be that you turn to your neighbors and have a conversation about what we just spoke about. So with that in mind, let's start processing some of the things that we just mentioned so far. What's resonated? What do you have questions on? What was interesting to you so far?
I think one of the first things that resonated with me, Seth, was even in your first slide, looking at outcomes and whatnot. And with our funding and the programs we work with, that a lot of the time they're not long term. So it's really hard to keep those long term objectives in mind when you're doing a lot of project based activities. And so the project based activities always stay very activity based, and it's challenging to keep everything focused on that long term.
How might you take what we learned and kind of strategize given like that constraint?
I think a lot of it has to do with our strategic outlook for our association and putting those long-term outcomes within our strategic plan, so that everything feeds into
Mm-hmm.
that and keeping that as our overarching outline. So
Um, okay, so we have a couple comments. I want to give it, Carla, follow up with the thought I had on that. So if I were to have, a summer-long activities-based program that had to change up to keep participant interest, but in the back of my mind, I still want to like behavior change. So I might just try and have a longer term, kind of a 3-year horizon to say, I'd like to change these grazing practices. And so the first thing I'm going to teach is going to be how people can assess the nutritional needs of their animals. And I'm going to do those activities all around the province. And I'm going to have them on farm. I'm going to film one and dump it on the web, and have people be able to you know, access that. I might write a fact sheet and have folks be able to read that. Then the next year, I might say I'm going to help people assess how much forage is actually standing in their field to meet that need. I'm going to give them a variety of different methods, run those in the same manner. And by year 3, I'm going to choose a different activity, but they're all going to be different pieces of that puzzle of improving grazing practices. And it might also be how to select livestock that'll perform well on pasture, or factoids of how to can questions, can livestock graze in the winter, and have farmers get together and share their input, their perspectives, like we were talking about, the different methods, going through 3 feet of snow, and the what how much forage could they access. But that might be one way of approaching that. I know that we had some comments earlier that I'm going to look at. I've heard, tell me and I'll forget, no adoption, show me and I'll remember, 30%, involve me and I'll do it. So the concepts are right on. The percentages, the science is really unclear on the percentages. So anytime that someone has those percentages, um, we haven't been able to find studies that affirm that. But the idea certainly is that listening only has a low retention rate. Low, it doesn't sink into the mind. That seeing a picture of something, or a photo, or a video actually has a 3-fold greater retention rate than just listening. Listening and seeing a picture has a 6-fold greater retention rate in the short-term memory. So now, so then that just allows that short-term memory to kind of take it in. It makes it through that kind of gatekeeper. Then if you actually want that to be used, you're going to have to process that. And that's where giving some problem, or having some discussion, or having some homework, um, that's where you're really going to uh, get the greatest retention rate. So let's take an example. I don't know the audience well here, so I saw the Beef Cattle Research Council, and I also was speaking with Carla before, so hence I'm on the grazing part. So we're on a farm, and I am talking about how to assess how much forage is available. And so I tell them, a beef cow is going to want 3% dry matter, 3% of its body weight in dry matter a day. And so say, how do we know how that's done? And say you can put together a you know square yard, and square meter rather, and you can put it out a PVC pipe, and I show you one. So now I've told you, you've seen it, so your mind's going to retain it. And then I throw it on the ground, and I say, grab the grass, rip it like a cow would rip it, put it in a bag, rip it to the stubble height that you want your cattle to graze, and go and weigh it. And at this time of year, assume it's whatever, 40% dry matter in the spring, 30% in the summer. And so now I've told you, you've seen it. So now that likely could be in your short-term memory. And now I bring those with me and I give them to you. And I say, okay, I want you to go, and you guys use this paddock, you all use that paddock, you all use that paddock. Go do it and report back to me. So now you're going to do it. You're going to get stumped. You're going to have people helping you if you're working in small groups. You're going to talk about it, and all that's going to kind of really reinforce that. And it's going to do so well more potently than if I even show that slide in a winter presentation. That makes sense? So that was answering that the beef cattle beef council presentation and thoughts. Other ideas on what we've spoken about so far and how this might impact your educational programming.
The other comment Laura had on here was a good reminder about education method to
Oh,
be asked more often.
yeah, yeah. All right, well, we will assume that we've emptied your cup enough with, although I know for in my mind that we haven't, but we'll keep going on in the slideshow. Um, okay, so here Anna was really looking at, she's still on the electronic surveys, um, giving people, again, this choice. Um, so understanding who your audience is pretty key. Do you all teach to a uniform audience or a fairly diverse audience? Diverse. How do you handle that, Laura? Okay, double diverse, okay. So what are strategies for handling diverse audiences?
And again, feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you want to do that. So Laura says lots of different extension methods: radio, email, newsletters, etc.
Mhm.
I think the content too, having.
When we speak of diversity, are we speaking in,
Go ahead, sorry.
yeah, the content's going to be pretty key. So diversity often is going to result in a different level of expertise with the material. And so that makes things quite difficult. We just taught QuickBooks, and we had people who had never had QuickBooks before and were intimidated by setting up this electronic record keeping, accounting record keeping system. We had people that had been using it for a decade and really wanted to learn how to be more efficient with it. So likewise, you're going to have that with most of your subject matter. What are strategies people use to deal with that?
I think it becomes a challenge. We were looking at another example is the computer lessons, and same thing. You have people that have never turned one on to people that want to know how to better use the filters in Excel spreadsheets. So
Mhm.
we've almost had to move some topics to move to very one-on-one training or having a trainer come in and like Lorraine's saying, lots of different levels to a course. So having them doing very specific questions that they're answering and
Yeah.
able to work with someone. So again, it becomes a challenge with having enough staff or resources to be able to do that. But again, that the information that we're giving to them has to be very pinpointed to what their need is. Otherwise, they're not engaged, like you said, and they're not retaining any of that.
Yeah, so when you see a graph skewed like this, okay, 60% are farmers, you then probably would also want to question as to how long have you been farming. 18% are aspiring farmers. So what's that, a gardener, a homesteader, or maybe they just read about it. Um, and then you know that you're going to have this diversity. So as Laura said, the content's going to have to be able to catch up the people that are beginners, and you might say that up front. Sessions 1 and 2 are optional if you feel experienced. By all means, feel free to participate, but know here's what we're going to be covering. And so as Lorraine just said, be clear in that course description so people know what they're getting. And then you can say, okay, so you're then going to try and bring the base level up. Then 3, 4, and 5 sessions, you might be able to take them to that very next level that will be uh, at the more advanced or intermediate level. So that's one way. Another way is actually pairing knowledgeable people with very unknowledgeable people. Um, by teaching, that is a fabulous way of learning. And by learning from your peers, as well as having educators there, that's also different voices and different presentations of the same content. That's also another good way of handling diversity. Other ways people have gone about that? Clearly, if you wanted to mix the group up and mix and match, either mix them up to segregate experienced from those without experience, or to actually mix experience and inexperienced together, you're going to need to find out who's who, right? And so you're going to have to, in the either pre-session or during the session, survey it and to be able to understand the experience differentiation. So, oh, you're an advanced person, Carla. Seth, you're a beginner. I either purposely want to put you together and give you an assignment to work on together, or I actually want to separate the class and maybe have different assignments at different levels. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
I'll assume, yeah. All right, and moving forward there. Um, okay. Just more examples of strategies. Okay, so um, we spoke about the you're determining what your behavior change you want to occur, what learning has to happen, and now you're trying to really and something is driving you to do that. One of the things that might be driving you to do that are survey information from an electronic survey. Again, cheap, reach a broad group of people. Um, Also anonymous with frequency, so people can really share what they want. Um, Now, focus groups are yet another way. Have people used focus groups before to kind of drive what behavior change, what educational programs, what educational methodologies they're going to use?
I
I can't
think.
see the comments, Carl, if there are any, but
Oh, sorry. I think ARD, like the government uses groups more. I don't
mhm.
think, like with the ag research associations and forage associations, we haven't had the money to do that kind of stuff.
Okay. So
Unfortunately,
let's talk
it is
about a way
relatively
that we might be. I'm sorry.
saying it is relatively expensive to do if you're having a
So
facilitator.
one way that you go, Carla.
Sorry about that. I think it is a fairly expensive way to go if you have um, a facilitator involved in the process, which you should, and so it gets very expensive.
Okay, so here's a way that I've kind of mixed and matched. So I've used the one-on-one farm visits to kind of identify need. I've used surveys to help them prioritize programmatic needs, education methods to some extent. And then I would use um, focus groups. And I would use focus groups when anytime growers were getting together at a meeting. So maybe it's a regular annual whatever meeting, whatever the commodity that the growers are all together, and then I might take a 20-minute session out of that day or half day meeting and really ask them specific questions because they are my target population then likely or I would I wouldn't do a focus group at a farm or at a participant association meeting if they weren't my target population. But if I'm going to a meeting and I'm going to do it on grazing and it's some forage or livestock or whatnot, so they're my target population, and I could really ask 4 or 5 different questions. Again, really drilling down as to what do they do? Do they see value in this change of behavior, this research, this new method of doing it? What would it take to convince them there is value in that? Do they feel they have the infrastructure to do that? What skills do they already have, and what skills would I really want to build on? So now I can really drill down, and then the synergy of the group really helps me target things in a better manner. If I didn't have a focus group and that ability to do that, I might go to something like an advisory group where, I mean, I have across the state of New Hampshire, which we have 10 counties, which um, I have farmers that I'm friends with in all these counties, and I work a lot with farm management. So I'll use them as an advisory group. Hey, do you think this is a good idea? Now, they're all different sizes, they're different commodities, so they have divergent interests, but they're friends of mine. And so they'll say, nah, that bores me, or when extension does this, I just assume take a nap, or boy, that would be really good, or boy, yeah, I bet you're going to be scaring people by that method. So that advisor group is another way of really getting input. Um, and then, sometimes I'll ask friends they can go and get information from other farmers when they are meeting at their meetings, and I'm not even there, so they can kind of feel more comfortable in telling it how it is. What are your experiences with kind of like in-person, you know, assessments that could drive programming topic or programming methodology?
Oof, we got a tough crowd today, Seth.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm not sure then if this webinar is meeting your needs, but so I'll kind of go into anecdotes. So I've been in working with farmers since '95, and worked overseas in the Peace Corps, and then I went to Wisconsin's extension system and came to New Hampshire's 13 years ago. I often would read or hear um, pieces of information and then would say that would make a good program. And I would go and I would advertise and market the program and deliver it in a lecture-based method, and it was pretty funny, so would sing and dance and entertain people up there, use some colorful slides, and you know, our common clientele group would come. But I never really was getting people to do things, to adopt practices to the extent that I thought would be effective. And I also, you know, people had a great time, were really satisfied, and you got good evaluations, but the information wasn't as impactful as I was hoping it would be. So I started asking the question, so what the heck has to change for this to be different? You know, like you could go out and hit a farm visit and identify weeds. You can give an herbicide recommendation, organic, inorganic. You could help crunch some numbers with the people and give your opinion on whether that was profitable or not profitable. You could give them some new grazing practices, but real change, real meaningful change to farmers who, that's the client group that I'm passionate about, wasn't happening to the extent I wanted it to. So I was researching how to be more effective. And that's what all of this was about for me, was how to be more effective at what I do. So the farm visits, that's putting out fires, right? That's giving some education. It's also the expert view of, you know, hey, here's my opinion. You should adopt it. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But how do you put together an educational program that's really meeting their needs, that they have input into content, method, times, all those different things. And so that's what this is all about. And so that's what I'm trying to convey today. Is there something, so 26 of you attended, what do you want to get out of the remaining 40 minutes that we have here? Let's take the pulse of this webinar. My sense is, although I can't see you, that you're somewhat bored or disinterested. So if that's the case, let's change topics. Let's change what we do or how we do it.
I have to disagree. No, it's interesting that you say that.
All
Seth.
right.
I was at the Canadian Forage and Grasslands conference last week,
Hmm.
and one of the comments that was made on the first day was that the level of adoption is, in the last 100 and some odd 30 years that they've tracked this within Canada, is that adoption is the lowest and the slowest it's ever been. So my question to the group was, why do we think this, or have we asked the producers that, or is it that the methods that we're using are not effective? Or is there not enough funding that we can get out there enough to get enough information? So I'm interested in where you're going with that and the information that you found with regards to getting that information to producers.
Yeah. And then Lauren says that, and I would agree, it's not fully fair that I'm just, throwing these questions out that my mind has been, cogitating for so long, and, you're supposed to just be coming back at it. And I can respect that. Um, and I'm here to learn what works for you, okay, and how I get information. Very good. Okay. Well, we'll keep on this track. If there's folks that say, I want to learn this, throw it in your chat box, and we can switch gears. So these are ways that I go about trying to really put together different programs that I think would be really beneficial to the growers. Um, we are at a place, I think, with our in our employment that we have such rich and deep relationships with many of our clients. So we can really get a lot from the one-on-one and ideas. We also have the beauty of being able to the beauty of time to be able to read research and what is going out there, what's cutting edge. Even the example I got today, Carla, help me fill in the blanks because I had never heard of it, but you take a grain at some stage of production, I think it's prior to maturity, you cut it, you leave it on the ground, and it gets snowed on, and somehow livestock can sniff it out and ferret through 3 feet of snow and eat it. Is that more or less correct?
You bet. That's swath grazing in Alberta.
Swath grazing. So we don't do that here in New Hampshire. I don't know if it's applicable. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I don't know if it's been, heard of and rejected or whatnot. I certainly know we grow triticale. So at least
Yay,
that was
there's your
one of the
first cutting edge. That's the crop you should be using. So,
yeah. So so I was like, so I can take that kernel of an idea and I can now bounce it off of this kind of advisory group, right? Farmers that I have a relationship with that I can see, do they think that's insane? Or do they also think that that is something they said, I don't buy it. There's no way a cow is going to be trying to graze through 3 feet of snow. It just don't happen. And I could say to them, what would what would convince you it did? And they might say, nothing short of seeing it.
haha,
And
Carla's
I might say,
videos and a
okay,
trip to Alberta.
yeah, exactly. So I might say, well, look at these videos. If I gave you a website, would you go to this? Would you go and it might say, yeah, all right. So that might give me an idea for a program. And now I might get people together in this activities-based mode, right? And show everyone this video in a room and have a discussion on it. What do you think of that? You think we could do that here? You know, and you know, what would be barriers, what would be obstacles? Take that from there and and then also try and ferret out, okay, what would be the value of this? Why would we want to do this? And they might say, well, that's less grain I have to feed. That's less labor it would take me to actually harvest that. That's less equipment I would need. When we start jotting down all these different economic considerations, time considerations, benefits to farming. So now I can go back and I can then work either by myself or with colleagues and say, let's really try and ferret out an educational program on this. Here's the behavior change we'd like to see. We'd like to see growers growing triticale. We'd like to see growers harvesting it in this manner, leaving it on the ground. We'd like to have some research that guides, what's the best stage of harvest, what's the best variety. Then once, and we might then work with some of these growers on that. And now, so those would be the programs. And now I might start doing some electronic surveying, saying, okay, on this program, would you be interested in participating in something that would save you time and money on feed costs for your livestock? Things to that effect. Um, putting, if you did, when would you like to attend these programs? Would you be willing to view things online, get together in person, so on and so forth? Um, I also might say in the survey, what would convince you to adopt this? And if it was research, I might go on to some research grants and again, find some farmers that I'm friends with to do some on-farm research. That would be how I would kind of take and use these concepts to really put together a long-term program over time. And so that would be one idea just off the top of my head of implementation of that. I might find in this survey group some growers that tried it and failed and said, yeah, that just didn't work. It rotted too quickly, or I just got a poor yield of it, or my cows didn't go through 3 feet of snow, or body condition scores plummeted, and so, I'm never doing that again. Milk production went down. And so at least I would now be able to also then take that focused information to direct research and say, I'm not ready to roll a program out on this yet. I'm not convinced, and I would then go and contact others around the country or the world who have done this. So those would be ways in which I would kind of use that combination of one-on-one input, general electronic survey, advisory groups. If I was at a grazing conference, a focus group on that, things to that effect. So that's just a one application on that. So um, moving on to some, I'll go,
I was just going to
Carla.
say, I was recently reading a Peter Senge book, and one of the things that he talked about that I really catch as key as to what you just said right now was the value of dialogue versus discussion. So, discussion when people are coming to the table with their own ideas and defending their ideas versus a dialogue where people are um, conversing back and forth and everyone throwing their ideas onto the table and then coming up with a group idea from that. And even when you're
Mhm.
saying talking with your focus groups and your advisory groups, it's not you saying you need to start grazing swath grazing triticale, it's a great idea, I want you to do it. It's you going to them saying, hey, I heard this, what do you think about this, and asking questions and asking for their input.
Mhm.
And I see that as being very valuable versus, you know, as opposed to, like, a survey is great, but having that back and forth two-way conversation is so critical in this.
It is, and that's going to actually give you some even richer information than you would even think. So another practice that came out of Sandy Bell was her research that found that farmers, but all adults, have what they call mental models. They have a pre, they have assumptions and beliefs about the subject matter you're teaching. And if you don't know what those are often barriers. The mental models are actually neurological cells that come together in a specific pattern. But aside from the neurophysiology, which is pretty neat, it says that your audience comes to your educational programs with preconceived notions, either biases that say there's no way that that would work, or I believe it and there's nothing going to tell me that's going to make me not believe it. And so by knowing that up front, you can then help address that straightforward and know what those biases are going in. So an example of that, when I was in grad school, organic matter was great. You couldn't have enough organic matter. It did all the great things that we know organic matter to do. It had greater cation exchange capacity that held nutrients better. It had greater biological diversity, microbial populations, macro and micro forms, etc. It had nutrients that plants could take up. It made soil healthier, more workable. Well, so people felt organic matter is good, more organic matter is better. Then research started coming out on phosphorus. So up until, I don't know, almost the 2000s, phosphorus was only able to move via erosion, so displaced in soil particles. Now, then we discovered that actually phosphorus was way more soluble than we thought. So now high concentrations of organic matter, compost manure, actually can contaminate groundwater. Farmers were rejecting that. They were like, whatever, we don't believe you, and we won't accept it. Unless you knew that obstacle and what and how to address that and how to show them in some meaningful way, likely your education was not going to result in adoption of practices. Um, we had a hard time getting farmers to move from set stock grazing to management intensive grazing. They were outside, they were in pastures, they'll self-select what they want to eat. Life is good, leave them alone. And so knowing those obstacles, that marries back to what you just said, Carla. A dialogue. In a dialogue, if you're listening for what people want and what people don't want and what their biases are, both positive and negative, that's also going to help you really put together a more effective program that results in behavior change. So you're going to know that up front too. The other way that it fits into adult education is that in order for the brain to make new meaning, so there's that saying, the brain must make meaning, it can't take meaning, which means that I can't just give you knowledge and dump it in your head and you're going to adopt it. That I can give you knowledge, but only through experience are you going to actually translate that knowledge into action. So you have to make meaning yourself. And the way that you make meaning is you link past knowledge and past experience to this new future knowledge. So that Senge dialogue mode also lets you know what their past knowledge is, what their past experience is, and allows you to actually reference that specifically in making new meaning and new practice. Does that make sense to folks?
That's an
It's
awesome
pretty
comment.
cool stuff.
That last comment's awesome.
So that dialogue really has a great deal of a meaning. All right, moving to this next slide. Okay, wait, that's not my next slide in theory. I skipped it. All right. Oh, okay, so now we're looking at taking the pulse during the session. So whatever method you used, you put together an educational program, you're now running some of your activities. With frequency, we just go with it. What I try to do is I try to take the first hour to whatever, depending on how long the session is, of my activities that I'm going with, and then I try and I really try and take the pulse during it. I do that in a couple ways. With frequency, I'll hand out index cards at the beginning of a session, and I'll ask people what they want to get out of this. Why did you come? Why did you take the time? What do you actually want to gain from this? So I'm asking them to have skin in the game from the get-go. I'm asking them to identify their own goals and what they want from it. I, in my mind, know what I want them to get from it, but I'm really asking them what they want. And that now is the barometer for their satisfaction and for as a class delivering what they want. So that's the beginning. And then I will actually stop in class at a break point and I'll say, hey, how is this going? Is this delivering for you what you came to find out, what you came to learn? And I'm wanting to know content in that perspective. And I can do that with, I like using electronic clickers, and I don't know if any of you have ever used those. I'm trying to look at, hang on 1 minute. I'm going to go off camera for a second. Turning Point. So they're really affordable technology. It's called Turning Point technology, and Carla has used that. So you can really get anonymous information. You can also, everyone's clicking and they want to know what the group really thinks, and it puts up a graph right afterwards. That's pretty cool. So I ask them, have you, content-wise, is this what you want? And I get a flavor. Um, then I also might go to flip chart and say, well, what other information did you want that you're not getting right now or that you don't see on the agenda? And I put that on up. Again, using that adult education method of having them have say in the content of the session. I then ask them, are the educational methods working for them? And if not, do they want more small group? Do they want more large group? Would you like me to give you a problem and hand it out, and have you work on it? Am I talking too much? Are there people in the group that are just dominating it? And I try and really look at doing that, and that's during the session. That works really well, assuming that you're prepared to actually change, right? And so when you know a lot about the subject, that's easy to change. When you kind of don't know a lot about the subject, that's difficult to change. And obviously, we in the education profession get a lot. We in the education profession really are, teaching such a spectrum. Some is right in our comfort zone, and some were kind of like, whoa, we put a, program together a week or two before, and if you stick to the script, you're fine. If you deviate from it, you're kind of on thin ice. So it depends on where your comfort level is. I also during it will usually towards the end ask what future programming they want to be able to make the behavior changes we're seeking. So what additional information do you need? Um, and how would you do this program in the future? Those type of things. Likewise, would you be interested in webinars in the future if we can't all get together? Would you be interested in participating in a research program? Those type of things. Then finally at the end, I'll ask them, what do they intend to change as a result of today and were their needs met? So that's another way that I kind of take the pulse during it. Comments and experiences of others in the audience today on how they might use some of those concepts? Any more expansion on any of the things I've introduced already? All right, very good. So then, um, so these are just ways that one could one can actually look at getting people's opinions. You might also have people pair up in groups and talk about what their educational needs are, what behavior changes they intend to make, what resources they want. That helps them a lot as well. They can report back to the group, um, things to that effect. Clickers is another way of getting people's input. Using index cards during a session is another way. So we spoke about those. Spoke
So,
about that.
Lorraine said with your question about how do they intend to change, how do you ask that question to people?
So given that specific subject, I might have a choice of change. So do people intend to increase the density of their livestock in a paddock and grazing? Well, who here intends to try these new varieties of tomatoes? Do you intend to utilize QuickBooks, after this class? And has this four-session course, is what we just got done giving Monday, has this four-session course given you the ability to implement this? So ask them if they intend to, then ask them if they have the resources to it. What additional resources would you need to implement whatever the practices I'm looking at? Do you intend to determine the cost of production of your top four enterprises in your business or on your farm? You know, if so, why? Why is that something you want to do? Those are those are what I tend to get at. If I can ask, or you might even just go fishing and say, based on today's session, do you intend to implement any behavior changes? If so, why? So research shows that intention is a decent indicator, a decent metric that they will implement their behaviors, implement some behavior change. If you ask why, and they actually have a reason and a reason that's meaningful to them, then that gives you even more confidence that they might that are likely to. And then as you'll see in the post-session evaluations at 3 months or 6 months down the road, now you actually know what you're going to be searching for. So as opposed to saying, last August when you attended, our four-session, grazing workshops, did you implement any behaviors? You actually now could list last August as a result of our four-session grazing workshops, the intended behaviors that participants said that they were likely to implement are X, Y, Z, P, Q, R. Did you implement? Please check all the ones you implemented, and that'd be an efficient way of using an electronic survey. If I knew that Carla specifically said she was going to not bring animals back to her paddocks until they, were the grasses were all at least 8 inches tall, I could go back to Carla specifically and say, hey, did you do that? Did you go out and measure? Um, things to that effect. So it depends. The behavior change could be based on, you could ask that either in that broad fishing method of, as a result of today's class, do you intend to change anything? If so, why? And that could all come in, with no names on it, because we often do anonymous things, makes people feel more comfortable. And then that could be used for the follow-up evaluation 3 or 6 months later. The behavior change could be specific. They have their name on it. You also might say, based on what you wrote on that index card and what you want to get out of this session, what do you intend to implement as a result of today's session? And then again, they could be, you're referring them back to their original goals, and that would be another way I might ask it. Other ideas on how to ask that and ferret that information out? Nope. All right. This is again in a session. It's at the end of the session, you know, brainstorm education methods they'd like, report back to the whole group. You might put all these different future training topics and future training needs on flip charts and hand out dots and have people walk around the room. Particularly if you can get them moving, that's a positive thing. Say, okay, put a dot on the topic you want, us to follow up with, you know, and give them five choices, and they could choose three out of five or all that they want, And likewise, after they brainstorm in that small group, different ways they want to receive the information, they can go and prioritize that. Now you got some hard data on what at least that group of people would like. Um, Here is a way of assessing knowledge before after a session. So it's at the end of a session. It's called a retrospective survey. It's a really neat tool. It's really easy to use. It doesn't measure like the amount of knowledge gained. So you can't say they scored 85% of the people scored a 70% or above. It doesn't work that way. But you could certainly see that before they came into this program, their level of knowledge as they self-assess, so not as documented, they didn't test in it, but they self-assessed it. I came in and I had a minimal level of how to scale up a business, using planning or how to do enterprise budgets. And at the end, I have a moderate or I have considerable. So that's a neat way of at least capturing some knowledge gained as a result of the workshop. That also can let you know if people were in the minimal or moderate range. It gives you some insight as the educational method and what needs to be followed up on a little bit more. Have people used retrospective surveys like this before?
We just changed ours about 6 months ago, so we have exactly like you have it, but we have knowledge of opportunities before and after, your confidence in the work within the context of the event topic before and after, your
Yeah.
skills and strategies to work with the topic, and your understanding of the link between your needs and the topic of this event.
And will you list topics like in this areas? Would you list?
This one's specific for a workshop evaluation, so this would be at a specific event. So
Did
it's
the
just
event have multiple topics or was it singular?
no, they would be singular for something like this.
Okay.
We'd be talking about one thing, so their skills before and their skills afterwards. And but I think that one of understanding the link between what your needs are and the topic, that's probably one that we could expand on a little bit more. And I liked what you said about the idea about what resources do you need to implement these ideas, because that gives you an idea of where you can help them with other information or tools like QuickBooks or things like that, right?
Yeah, I like your on the confidence too. Confidence is a pretty key indicator. If they have a desire and they're confident in it, it's likely. If they have a desire and they're not confident, you're gonna have to follow up with something. And those resources, asking them on that, I mean, they might say, boy, I need a one-on-one hand-holding, or I need, a fact sheet, or I need a video or something to guide you on that. The neat thing about this too is also in the back of your mind, all this is data to justify grants. 38% of participants said that they needed one-on-one work, while another 72% said that they would be able to implement these practices if we provided them with web-based educational videos or whatnot. And so now the grantee or the funding agency now says, okay, well, this is documented. These people are likely to achieve success because they actually have measured data. And so not only does it help you with your program, it helps you find resources for the program too. And I do a lot of grant reviews, and if there is not, tangible data to support the need for the grant more than, research shows the average farmer does this or doesn't do that, we really want specifics. The grant's not likely to be funded, but so I like the confidence. I like following up with that and the resources, and it gives you a bunch of information to go with. All right. Intended change survey. Based on what you learned in the past 3 days, what are the top 3 changes you want to make? And so This one gives you a little bit of accountability. By blank date, I will. So you're almost asking them to make a contract with themselves. So by blank date, I will purchase QuickBooks. By blank date, I will, have set QuickBooks up, and by, the end of May, I will be entering data. All right. So, and then you're asking them for their own kind of monitoring, the impact of these changes. I will watch and track what. So what that question does is it's showing them the benefit of the practice to themselves. So I will track my cost of production for these enterprises. I will track if my prices actually cover my cost of production. I will track how much was sold. You know, I will track if we are more profitable as a farm. I will track if we save time. I will track if we're more efficient. So you're asking, so this is kind of a neat tool because you're asking, what are you going to do? And then what do you think the impact's going to be for yourself? So I like that. Anybody play with something like this?
Could you even take
Nope.
this one, Seth, and have them write this on index cards as as something to keep for themselves? I know I've done it in workshops in the past where you actually like write yourself a letter and then commit to opening it in 6 months and seeing if you did it or not. But even if they put it
Yeah,
on
exactly.
for
Yeah.
themselves and they're not necessarily sharing it with you, but it's something they'll have. And I mean, it's still their own responsibility to do it or not do it, but
Yeah, I,
written
I
down.
think I think that that absolutely could be done by the cell, and it depends. So, if you're responsible for showing data that this was impactful, you might. What I've done is I've photocopied it and given it back to them. And if they did, but if you're like, no, this is really, I'd like to see them doing this. Hey, then have it for themselves and not you. Absolutely. Yeah, whatever your intention is. So, ba boom. Okay, so then afterwards, try and track change after some time, and we're coming to the close. So phone calls I've used a lot. I really like the phone interview. Okay, obviously that's time consumptive. You have 200 people, you're likely not making 200 phone calls. But also people will tend to tell you what you want to hear, but that's not always the case. I mean, I've had folks say, look, I've just done nothing. Yeah, I thought I was going to, buy QuickBooks and analyze my enterprises. I didn't, nah, I didn't really, I left my cows out there for 7 days. Yep. I understood that they were going to overgraze after that. I just didn't have the time to do it. So I've actually found a good level of honesty, but phone calls do take some time. You do get rich data though. Not only do you get some behavior changes, you also get anecdotal stories, you get numbers. You could follow up on questions. Did you measure any greater profitability? Oh no, not so much. But they might tell you what they did find instead. But I do believe that we got to market weight earlier, or I know that I spend less time, and so that allowed me to do other things. So online surveys are really great follow-up tools. You usually have to send them out 3 to 5 times to get a decent completion rate. Over 75%. But they also, those programs you spoke about, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, that makes that pretty easy, not a big deal. Um, Paper surveys, I don't do those anymore. They're expensive. You got to make them up, photocopy them, mail them, then enter the data when it comes back. So I tend not to do that. Um, Individual visits, another way of kind of following up. That's also a decent way if you're a team. If you have like 5 folks in your organization or in your area, and you all put this program together, and you're gonna then go back to your different provinces across the country. If you're all asking the same questions, you can collect that data apples to apples pretty readily if you're making these individual visits. And again, that kind of phone call or individual visits are really where you get some rich stories and data, more so than the surveys, even if you give them comment boxes. Listservs, just having discussions, you might be able to glean some things. Um, and Focus groups, I've had limited success in focus groups, but again, if I'm going to a big event where a bunch of the participants are there, I might take 20 minutes and just ask a bunch of questions. So those are ideas. Have other folks used various different tools to assess programmatic outcomes? Which one is the most effective in terms of getting just a volume of data? Online surveys, cheapest, easiest, collated graphical output. In terms of getting, and then in terms of like really going deeper, I'll choose between a phone call or an individual visit. So so in my life, farm visits are part of my weekly regime. So I'm on farms, I'm seeing a bunch of people, and I can ask on those things. But phone calls, if I have more than, I'll do it for 20 to 30 people over, set it out and do like 4 in a day, and then I'm done with that. But I can do that 20 or 30 in a week. But so those are effective coupled with online surveys, I would say. But,
And like Lorraine says, it's a good excuse to touch base with people.
oh yeah, yeah. Because just even that intervention of what did you do prods people to be like, oh yeah, I remember I was going to do that. So it kind of serves as a tool in and of itself. But all right, and then here's kind of future needs surveys. You might come up with, are you interested in doing research with us, teaching, networking with others, and you can just get this kind of like priority. No, not interested. Yeah, maybe. Not likely. Yeah, sure. If you catch me on a good day, or yeah, I'm pretty excited. So, and you could also see, would you be willing to share some information on what it did? Would you want, online courses to follow up, that type of thing? So, um, more examples of some stuff that we've used. This was obviously a train the trainer here. So as a result, did you go in and do any of that? Ag Squared is a record keeping system. BFs are beginning farmers. And again, they might have just considered it. But if they considered it, then that's, that part of your population needs more prodding. Or if they started it, not completed it, again, you might stay in contact. You might send like informational emails, things to that effect, or if they've completed it. Um, and here's what you could just write into the chat box. Somebody had said even use this. This goes to your intention. And that's all I got for you today.
You can do surveys on webinars too. Hey, that it can have a survey, you can type in a couple questions and put them up during the webinar.
Huh. Yeah, those polls that you could do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And that keeps things interactive for sure. Yeah. Any questions or comments?
So you guys can unmute yourself if you want to ask a longer question or if you want to type it in the chat box and we can repeat it to everybody.
You're welcome. Glad it was helpful.
And we will
Good
be able to
stuff.
send out, Seth has sent us a copy of this in a PowerPoint, and I will send it out via PDF to everybody that participated. And we did record today's session, so if you would like to access it via our website in the future, you can do that. So it's westcentralforage.com. And if you have any other questions or interests, then we can forward Seth's email address as well if he's open to having more questions.
Absolutely.
And if you guys have anything else that you do want covered in the future, by all means, we could have Seth back again with some more specific issues. I know Laura had said it would be nice to have some of these questions ahead of time. We were kind of hoping that questions would guide the conversation to some extent.
Mhm.
So, but if you do have specific comments then or questions, then we can look at addressing those in future webinars. So, and Lorraine promises she's going to do more post-event follow-up with her sessions.
Nice. Nice. Hey, well, thanks for sharing the afternoon with me.
Thank you, Seth. That was awesome.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, all.
You too.
Bye. Bye-bye.